You're tuned in to RX Radio.
So in terms of how we do an intro, we either do it according to what you tell us to do, and just by the way, we haven't been told to do anything for the last 8 weeks. So the intros have been me or halfway through the podcast remembering to welcome everyone to the podcast, and I throw it in whenever I can. That's the intro. So that's how we kind of been running it.
Yeah.
Which works, but also it's kind of how we run our lives.
Shit up, clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're listening to this, people are probably confused. Like, is it Sunday or is it Monday? I don't know, because they're both here.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, good, man. So we'll do a proper intro so we don't have to go back and do it later. Because if we do it later, the episode will already be out. So welcome back to RX Radio. Joining me now, I guess. How is this going to work? We're co-hosting this.
Yeah,
right?
It's Sunday and Monday hosting each other.
I guess, we're both a guest at the table that we both own. All right, well, yes, coming at you live, almost quite literally live. Episode 1 billion, maybe it feels like, it probably is. Today we're going to get into, we're going to talk a little bit about establishing a starting point. We're going to talk about whether you're looking to revamp your training and been training for a long time and you're not getting the results you want, whether you're a coach looking to bring on a client in a more efficient way as part of like streamlining your business model, or you're a client who's maybe auditing a coach that they have. It's like, all right, how can we really tell that we're taking a step in the right direction, that we're putting our best foot forward when it comes to allocating proper resources for our time we spend, whether it's on the training side, whether it's on the nutrition side. Before we do that, if you guys are interested, I got a lot of DMs about the next Prescript Level 1 course. If you head on over to www.predescript.com, hit the red L1 tab on the top right. You can sign up now on the wait list. It's the only discounted rate we have. Class will be opening up for registration. You can secure your seat in like 2-3 weeks-ish. So keep an eye out for that email, but only people on that list will get that discount. So head over to do that now. Boom, bills paid in the intro. Done. How do you want to run it? Do you want to run client side first, coach's side first, or athlete side first?
Let's go coach's side first, because I think that can be that can move its way into all of the other aspects of kind of client and athlete, I think.
Yeah. So you're a coach, and a lot of people are listening are coaches. I coach to some degree. I'm not nearly as good as you are.
Different.
Big rocks. The big rocks when it comes to all right, you're a coach looking to audit your intake process to really get a clear picture. Like, what are the big rocks in your eyes, or what are the things that you see missed most often?
First thing, looking back, so seeing where they're coming from. I think that's that's actually my biggest rock, and I think that's the one that's missed the most and the one that's not even discussed, is looking at where a client is coming from, whether that's nothing, like they've never trained in their entire life before, or whether they're coming from another coach, or what is their previous exercise history, like what sport did they play in high school, why that gives us some form of idea of like movement patterns that they've kind of been exposed to, also a mental capacity around things. Like if someone played Division 1 football in high school, or whatever the fuck it is in the United States, high school, you call it high school? High school?
Well,
college?
Yeah, Division 1 would be college.
College,
and
that's
then
what
high school would be high school. Yeah,
we have universities, I guess. Anyways, whatever. D1, it's like, okay, understand what their mental capacity is that you're working with. So you have someone who is more in the athletic mindset versus Peggy Sue, who just wants to lose 5 kilograms and look a little bit better for like the baby shower type scenario. Like that's two very different factors to take into account, but I think it's something that's not spoken about within the client intake as a coach. So it's like the previous, looking back to be able to look forward. Like my whole process of an intake is looking at where am I trying to take, what direction am I taking the client in, and I need to gather as much information around that to be as precise in my planning to take them in that direction. That refers to what have they done previously? What is like their background? What injury history do we have? What is their realistic goal? That's another one that I think needs time spent on within an intake. You've got someone who, wants to compete and they're 10 weeks out and they look like a tub of milk. yeah, it's not going to work so well. Like, you've got to have the realistic aspect of, can they do it? Can they not? Like, what are they willing to go to for those extents? And also, is it just plain realistic? Do you want to lose 10 kilograms and you are 100, or you're 60 kilograms soaking wet anyways? It's like, well, you don't have 10 kilograms to lose, and having that realistic conversation with the clients, and sometimes to the detriment of getting business. Like, I've had realistic conversations with clients in the past, and they're like, well, I want to do this. I'm like, well, that's fine, but I'm not going to be the person who can do that for you, because it's not going to be achievable. Why? Because my reputation and the results at the end of the day matter. Like, you come to me to get the result. If I'm going to tell you that the result is not possible, don't shout at me when I tell you that that's not possible. So I think those are probably the two big rocks, just off the top of my head. I don't know, your standpoint, your thinking.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point about work capacity being as much psychological as physiological. And I think that gets missed when we look at exercise selection, when we look at volume prescription out of the gate, when we look at relative intensities, whether it's RPE or reps in reserve. It's like, I think a lot of people, they just try and whitewash everyone that comes in the door. But I think, getting an idea of someone's movement history is, it's useful, like for the reasons you mentioned, repetitive patterns. Maybe they have some exposure to weight training as a byproduct of sport. Maybe weight training was the sport, come from a CrossFit background, powerlifting background. And then there's inherent movement biases that each one of those will carry. But it's like, do they know what hard is? Right? Like, how much of your coaching is going to be on technique, or how much of it is like, maybe we just need to establish a work capacity first. And that's going to massively, especially if you're dealing with someone who's relatively a blank slate. I think a lot of coaches skate by with the novelty factor of resistance training, not realizing that, like, there's gradations to success in that novelty period of, like, whether it's the early adaptation of motor unit recruitment and the first, whatever is cited, 13, 16 weeks, whatever. Most people simplify that to newbie gains. It's like, you can really do some damage in that first 2 months or 3 months or 4 months if you know what the fuck you're doing. Like, people make unbelievable results by just jumping off the fucking sidewalk in the first 4 months of resistance training. But if you can be like, hey, this person actually has somewhat of a muted work capacity, they don't have, they don't really have any sort of background that would indicate, like, that they know how to work hard. It's like, you're probably going to lend their program more to exercises that will, with whatever ability they have, maximize that ability. Not like self-governing exercises that, it's very hard to work hard in a squat and a deadlift and a single arm row. And it, like, you could go almost as far to say, and like, there are anything that's relatively externally unstable is going to make them think more than it's going to make them work. Now, that's really, to some degree, what a work capacity is your ability to think when you're tired. Right. So if you can't coordinate these movements, it's like, that's fine. Let's just build that engine first. And I've seen it done both ways. And if I were to do an A/B comparison or an A/B side by side of coaches who take new clients who understand this principle and just go, oh, okay, like, you're relatively new. I'm maybe not going to expend 30, 40 minutes a session teaching you how to squat or trying to load a squat or a deadlift, because I've been told by someone that these are foundational or primal or functional movements. I might spend 5 minutes a few times a week on like a goblet squat with your heels elevated. And then I'm just going to like put you in positions where you're just going to work. If for no other reason than to teach you what hard feels like, right? And, if you put a side by side of, subject A and subject B, always without fail, the subject B who goes into and does more work ends up with a much broader base out of the gate. And I think you can screen for that based off, like, what have you done?
Yeah. I went through stages of looking at program design and programming when I first called it 4 or 5 years ago. And I got exposed to the old, like, Poliquin way of like not GPP. Fuck, what did he call it? GBC. Do you remember Poliquin GBC? And I thought this was God's gift to the earth. Like, when I was starting with like Gen Pop type clientele and this upper lower split, and we were doing supersets of everything and like low skill, low yielding exercises. And then I started looking at the principles behind it. I was like, this is really stupid because, like, what am I getting from a maximal output? There isn't, and, not stupid from a Poliquin standpoint because he was not stupid at all. A little bit touched sometimes, but not completely stupid. And started, like, looking at the principle, and I was like, hold on, but exactly like you said, like, why are we not doing the squat? Why are we not doing the deadlift? Why are we not taking the time to teach those things? And then I applied that. And I looked at the results that I was getting from like a 12-week standpoint. And on the clients who didn't know what hard was, it failed miserably. Completely. And it was my audit of programming and audit. It was actually my audit of my intake about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago when I moved states, because I was trying to figure out a better way to expedite the process. And I literally looked at that exact concept of like, how can I pick up if a person is ready to go through the harder based exercise or the higher skill level exercises that I can utilize further down the line in programming to drive their output. Because at the end of the day, you get someone strong on a barbell, you put them on a machine, they're that much stronger and they can drive that much more output. Like strength training should be the basis, the foundational aspect of training. If you have the time and if you have the ability to teach them from that skill base, and that's the asterisk that needs to be fucking put on a lot of program design. And then I had the magic light bulb of like, son of a bitch, Poliquin was right. It's like, fuck. But right and also not right in turn, like, not right, it's not right, not applicable in certain ways. It's like, I can't give, again, Peggy Sue a heavy light style training program, which he ran. It would be like GBC, functional hypertrophy, 6 to 8s, and then like heavy light or some shit like that. That's how the order went. And like I took myself through a heavy light back in the day and I wanted to cry. It was stupid. It was one of the worst things that I'd ever done in my life. I accumulated so much volume, but I also sat there and I was like, hold on, I've been through some shit. I can handle this. Peggy Sue, not so much. She would have told me to fuck right off and she would have canceled her subscription or her payments and I would have not been able to eat. But and it all came down from that beginning start intake form of trying to understand like where is an individual at right now, where do they want to go from a realistic standpoint, do the two match, because that's a pretty big aspect of that. And then it's like, did she have the background? I've had moms and general population clientele come to me who have sporting background or want to kind of tap back into that competitive nature or that competitive mindset. If you mark that or you have that as a flag that goes off on your intake forms, like, all right, maybe I can push this individual. Maybe I do have the capacity to actually drive them as hard as we can. So I think, trying to think about my other parts in the intake, that's a big one. Have they been coached before is another big one, I think, is, as we kind of mentioned. If they have been coached and they had a bad experience, I want to know what the experience was. Now, this is more so to put a little red fucking asterisk in my back of my brain, never to do this for this client, ever. Whether it's, like I had a client who was like, I got drilled on deadlifts to the point where she got ripped apart by this coach in her deadlift technique that she now hates deadlifts. So do you know what I did not do in her first program? I did not give her deadlifts. Because she's like, yeah, maybe I'm comfortable to try doing deadlifts again. I literally said to her, I was like, you're not touching a barbell to do deadlifts for at least the first 12 weeks. Because she has that mental capacity there. The other one will be, communication or, I don't know, didn't give me enough feedback on my check-ins, whatever it is. So I make sure I over-compromise. Like, I just compensate as much as I can from that. It's like, I'm going to over-communicate. I'm going to communicate the fuck out of this. Like, you are going to want to not hear from me. Because they've given you the answer. It's a test that you have the answer for. So it's like, you can't fail if you ask the right question in the very beginning because they're literally telling you what they need. The other thing is, I guess I'll just quickly wrap up with that is ask like what the other coach did wrong and also what they did right. Because then you also know the next answer of like what to continue doing. Like they literally can give you what you need to do as a coach. And that's not saying that you have to completely change how you are as a coach, but that just gives you like a bit of a framework of, all right, I need to make sure I'm really on my shit or just continue doing certain things with whatever that is.
I think you brought up a really interesting point out of the gate, and it was talking about, the establishing like for a work capacity. I wanted to kind of double back to this again because I think on the coach's end, having a realistic framework, and it could start as simple as like an exercise Rolodex or an index, phraseology that we like to use, of movements that work. Like, let's start there, and then start with if you need to have a container around resistance training. That it's like, and what you are containing is the middle part of a bell curve, right? Like the difference between someone with a low work capacity and a high work capacity. We're talking like maybe a couple exercises, maybe a couple of sets. And I see this done in the nutrition space a lot. There is nothing honorable about programming your client into diabetes.
No.
Right? There is nothing honorable about programming your client into this absurd work capacity that's going to require 3-hour sessions. Right? So it's like, I am operating a session anywhere between 45 to 90 minutes maximum. I don't care if an athlete, and I'm going to use the word specifically athlete, and like outside of the bodybuilding space, although you could make an argument for 2-a-day sessions in the bodybuilding space. But if I'm working with an athlete who needs 2-a-day sessions, they're an athlete. Like we are not operating in this chunk, this Venn diagram that we're superimposing over a bell curve, right? They are what we would call an end tail distribution on a bell curve, and long end tails. They are just they're just cruising the x-axis. And so it's like, for the majority of people, the majority of the time, a good heuristic is like, you're dealing probably in a 45 minutes and 90-minute window for like almost anyone, unless that person feeds their family, and in most cases their grandkids with how much money they get made from sport. You're probably not looking outside that window. So that's like, build a container for your, like, what it is you're actually programming for. One, what are the exercises that act as good tools to either drive the stimulus or fatigue that we are looking for to build either work capacity or drive adaptation, respectively, right? So that's thing number one. A time constraint to do this in that's either realistic for a general population client or is going to extend too long in the physiological demands for someone who might be a high-end athlete. So you kind of have this 45-minute, in my mind, a 45-minute to 90-minute window. Good intake starts with the coach understanding exercise, because it's like when you write your first program, like, and I see this a lot in the nutrition space. I've watched people like brag about their clients' ability to do 3.5-hour workouts, and I've watched people brag about their clients being able to eat 700 grams of carbs. And for so long, I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean? Why is this person telling everyone that? Like, what? And they're like, no, he's proud of that. I was like, what? He looks like an idiot. Why is he bragging about it? He's like, yeah, I don't know. It's insane. And I think that's fundamental. If you're a coach, and in this little bucket of the conversation, you need to really rein in, like, hey, what am I doing? I am putting exercises in order, prescribing volume within this 45 minutes to 90-minute container, 3 to 7 days a week, right? And if it's 3 to 7, it's probably looking more like the 45 minute. And if it's, 3 times a week, you're probably looking more maybe the 90-minute. And like, that's it. Like, understand that the subtle changes you make at the top of the bell curve over time are what are really going to push you uphill. And it's the changes are like an extra set, a progression of a particular exercise. But like, a lot of the coaches I find that don't really understand this aspect of an intake are the same coaches that every 4 to 6 weeks are getting a completely overhauled program. Like, you don't respect the stimulus that you're driving. And then you see that from the very beginning of, like, you're just throwing the kitchen sink at everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, the next layer on that I think of, and again, it all comes to the principles, exactly what you're saying. They got to understand exercise prescription, and they got to understand exercise. Like, you only have a certain amount of exercises that actually fucking do something. Like, this is like, if I really look at all of my clients' programming, I have 20 to 25 exercises that I use. That's actually my pick of my bucket because everything else is just fucking useless. Like if we really wanted to think about it and like really dive into it, they're not, especially in my role and what I'm doing, even with my Gen Pop, maybe athlete specific when we're talking about that end of that bell curve, like the very, very fucking end, who are making money off this different scenario. We have another, index, or we can bring out our more advanced phone book if we were, kind of, or the additional that we would add on. But I just think it gets overcomplicated around what needs to be in a program, and then we decide to throw everything into the program at the same time. The next layer to this that I see is the misunderstanding of energy systems that need to be added to this. So to give, like, to follow on from your example of the 700 grams of carbohydrates, this is a resistance trained individual. They're not burning through 700 grams worth of glycogen. They're not getting on a bicycle and fucking cycling for 3 hours. It's like the energy system doesn't correlate to what we are doing in the gym. And this is like the principle behind that is how I can't understand why we've never looked at nutrition interventions need to match that of training, and training needs to match that of nutrition interventions. So that's like the principle. The principle is that if we're doing resistance training for 45 minutes to 90 minutes, you don't need fucking 700 grams of carbohydrates unless you are, I don't know what you're doing in the 90 minutes.
Lance Armstrong, unless you're climbing the Pyrenees mountain range. Like,
but that's where I think the disconnect is within this and this starts in the intake. It really does start in the intake, because if you don't understand that principle, your prescription of nutrition, exercise, recoverability, like all of these things is going to completely be thrown out the window, and you're actually not going to be putting the person in that fucking strike zone of the bell curve in all aspects of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, the idea that inputs drive outputs, I think, is so huge. And so many people are just prescriptive of outputs that it's like you are going to see such the fluctuation in performance that is clinically significant, not even statistically significant, from hydration alone. Right? If you're not consistent in hydration, you're going to see a noticeable difference in performance, and you're going to sit there as a coach who's blind to the inputs and be tracking the outputs and going like, maybe we need to do a deload, or maybe we need to do this. It's like, you don't need to do anything. This guy tied one on last night and you had no idea, and they went in like, ADHs through the roof, like it just dehydrated as fuck. And it's like, that would move the needle more dramatically, like accumulating fatigue to the point where it starts to really creep up in performance degradation takes time. Yeah. It takes time to, if anyone, and, you and I both come from a powerlifting background, and, it takes 6 to 8 weeks. When you go into a meet, you're kind of like, you're putting your toothbrush in the freezer. You're like, what the fuck why did I put my toothbrush in the freezer? That was wild, dog. Yeah. It's like, that's fatigue, right? Like, that's not being tired anymore. Anyone can wake up tired from the previous day's session. But like, for coaches to make these swing decisions on programming and just be chucking audibles every single day, it's like, you're not tracking inputs. So how can you interpret the outputs?
Yeah, so this is my gripe with the industry, especially currently, as we've evolved, and we think we've evolved. Definitely think we've evolved, and the whole, like, it's got sexy to like track data. Most people don't know what the fuck they're doing with the data. It's like, so why are we tracking it? And this is, I guess, this follows into, once again, the intake form of these things is, one, what data are you tracking? What data can you track with this individual? What data is applicable to the individual in front of you to start tracking? And then once again, it's like, is it realistic to track that data with them? I'm known for tracking blood pressure and blood glucose quite significantly with my athletes. Again, I'm going to use Peggy Sue. When Peggy Sue comes to me, I don't get her to finger prick fucking 3 times a week. Why? Because I don't actually give a fuck, and she's not going to do it. Do you know what I'm going to do with her? I'm just going to make sure that she's responding to the carbohydrates that I give her, and I'm not giving her 700 grams of carbs so that she doesn't become diabetic. I'm going to make her lose weight, because as she loses weight, insulin resistance or her ability to be sensitive to insulin is going to heighten. It's going to bring her, or hopefully bring her, further away from being fucking diabetic to being in the normal range. And yes, we do maybe a health screen and we make sure that blood pressure is fine and she gets like her her glucose or insulin checked in her blood test. And that's the extent of the data that I need to gather from her within that. I've got someone who is blasting fucking GH and insulin and a whole bunch of gear. Damn straight they're checking their blood glucose 3 times a day, 3 times a week. Why? Because there's things in play that is going to force them into diabetes. Two very different aspects, but understanding that the data matters within these things. But unfortunately, it got like glamorized of tracking data, or these outputs, and then not matching the input to that. It's like you've got someone who's tracking their blood glucose and consistent readings of like high 5s into the 6s, but you don't change anything, or you don't look at the prescription of what you've given. Wake the fuck up. Like, it's not difficult, I think.
Yeah, it's always odd to me, like, and whether it's prescribing volume that has you doing 2.5-hour sessions,
yes,
and it's like, or prescribing, a 60-kilo female 700 grams of carbs on a training day. It's like, I've always sat back and go, why are they admitting that? And someone literally tapped me on the shoulder and goes, dog, they're not admitting it, they're bragging about it. And I'm like, what? And it's like, yeah, they're bragging that this is an outcome that they desired. It's like, look, unless you're dealing with entails of performance and output, you don't need to be dealing with entails of inputs, right? You're feeding a chick that does fucking hip thrusts 4 times a week like she's Michael fucking Phelps. Like, dude, bong rips and Delicio pizzas, $100. If you're fucking swimming across the ocean every day, like, yeah, dude, light up, Mikey. Like, here, let me get the next toke for you, dog. Kid will be out there doing hot knives and shit. Like, yeah, eat whatever the fuck you want. But you literally have these, and it is funny now because the chickens have come home to roost. You're seeing kids literally, and these are people who aren't, who aren't enhanced, right? These are kids who haven't played with things that have, like growth hormones going to increase lipolysis, decrease glycolysis. Like, these are people who are just, reverse, I'm going to air quote, reverse dieting into a point where like, oh yeah, and I'm back eating. Like, your pancreas doesn't care.
Yep.
Like the beta cells and islets of Langerhans, they know what is going on with this fucking blitzkrieg every day with the carb. We're on the carbs again. Like, yeah. And it's so, and it comes down to this idea of like, look, you need to put this in a container, 45 to 90 minutes, probably 3 to 6 times a week, probably looking at 3 to 6, maybe 7 meals a day within a range of like, I don't really care how big you are or how big you want to get. Unless you're doing a high day for some predetermined reason, I don't want to see 700 grams of fucking carbohydrates, right? Like, we can go some, isocaloric, equal fat, protein, and carbs, and just elevate this thing so all the physiological systems that get affected by micro and macronutrition are going to upregulate to an equal degree. Not just take your fucking pancreas behind back like old Yeller to be like, hold on, we gotta come join me out back. What's going on? And just blow your fucking like, it's nuts. And coaches do it every fucking day, and it's like, you have to be so. I think you have to be realistic about the sensitivity of the body. I think that's what it comes down to, is like the idea, like, if when you understand a paracrine system, you understand hormone signaling, like, have someone break into your crib and think how much actual norepinephrine, epinephrine, and adrenaline was in my system for my fucking eyes to go completely wide open. I'm seeing through walls. My digestion completely stops. My peripheral vasculature constricts. My vision narrow. And it's just like such a minuscule amount. Like, the body is a relatively sensitive machine. And you're out there just fucking wrenching out 100 grams of carbs. Oh, what is this? This pancreas doesn't look like we need that. It's like, fuck, god damn it, man. It's insane.
But it's again, it goes. I like the analogy that you're constantly using now of the container, because I think that's it is that it needs to be constrained to a certain degree of within this this thinking, especially with the individuals we work with, like they're not as special as I think people make them out to be. And I think that's part of the problem. It's like we're cherry picking individuals and being like, yeah, you're unique. You can handle 1,000 grams of carbohydrates. Yes, you're on 50 grams of fat. So hold on. Why don't we do the isocaloric at standpoint? Why don't we bring fats up a little bit more? Yeah, I don't give a fuck if you're enhanced and you're now not worried about your hormone production. It's like fats are actually doing a whole bunch of other things in the system that, is sensitive. The changes you're making are so precise to what's going on. I know we're using nutrition a lot within this analogy, but I think volume also works hand in hand with this. The multiple hour based sessions that I see individuals doing, like lower body, and it's stupid. It is so stupid because the needle only needs to be moved 1 inch, like a tiny fucking percent, for you to create an adaptation. And it's a misunderstanding what an adaptation actually is in the pursuit of this long-term goal of getting bigger or stronger or whatever it is. Like, adaptation is the goal. You can just do one little thing. It can be one set. You don't need to do 300 fucking exercises. Like, it shows me that the thought process is just not there. It shows me I'm going to have a job for the rest of my life.
Yeah. What gets me is like people only learned physiology and training through the lens of putting on muscle.
Yes.
Magnesium is responsible for over 400 processes in the body. And the only thing you're ever going to hear about is its effect on sleep, because that's the thing that bodybuilders, it's like, dog, all right, I'll wait for the other 399. It's the same thing with training. I had this conversation the other day, and I was talking about the utility of non-converging resistance profiles with strength curves, which anyone who can kind of track the language is like, I really like exercises that don't converge. Like, I like bent over barbell rows. I like I like pressing that doesn't have this sort of as accommodating resistance. So as I get into a weaker position, it drops off. I like it from a joint perspective. I like the auto regulation that comes with something. It's like, hey, as something gets into a more stressed position, the fatigue that's going to accumulate will stop that person from being able to really overload that stretch position of the joint, because they're going to be met with more and more workload, and they're going to get cut off, right? So as you're doing, say, for example, like a dip versus some sort of dip machine, it's like, well, yeah, you're going to be under a lot of stress in the stretch position, but you won't be able to complete the repetition if it just gets heavier as you go into that stretch position. You're like, oh, that's the failure point. Where if you had a machine that dropped that off, you can now take a hyperextended shoulder position and load it more and more and more and more and more, which could be a net detriment long term. So there's an auto-regulatory effect to these like diverging strength curve resistance profiles that, they don't allow you for like what we'll air quote as like the optimal way to train something. But it's like, you only learned neuromuscular physiology or arthrokinematics as so much as it served you to try and put on muscle in a vacuum or under a microscope. It's like if you learned arthrokinematics through just the skeletal mechanics and you learn joint mechanics, not for the only purpose, or if you learned physiology just like not for bodybuilding purposes, it's like, yeah, this is like clinical physiology. You go, oh, wow. So the 700 grams of carbs thing might not be it, but people only learn, whether it's neuromuscular physiology, whether it's biochemistry, whether it's, some of the deeper nutritional pathways that I guess fall under the categories. They only learn it through this very myopic lens of like muscle. And it's like, there's so many intersecting systems in the body. Like, are you stupid? Right. So it's like, going and taking a general phys course or a general exercise science course is like going to give you just a breadth. And the thing is it opens up your eyes to not necessarily like how to make something happen. It opens up your eyes to what's happening regardless of if you see it or not. Right? You start to realize that it actually gives you more tools rather than less. So people like, well, like we said, like you're not that special. Well, if you only learn physiology through the lens or under the microscope of how it interacts or affects, muscle physiology in the pursuit of building or growing a particular tissue, you're really missing so much of the picture. And in willfully blinding yourself to the rest of that picture, you actually leave a lot of potential adaptation on the table.
Yeah, you're completely pigeonholing yourself in one direction, and that's it. It's like instead of being able to take that zoomed out approach, all right, well, this is the principle that I know for muscle building, but at the same time, how does the body actually fucking work? Like, does it match? Does it correlate? What are the? I like that again. It's what are the tools do I now have access to that is not just the fucking hammer, and now I'm not just trying to, screw a screw in with the backside of the hammer. As my grandfather would have fucking turned in my grave, or his grave. Sorry, not my grave, his grave, if he had seen me ever do that. And I'd look at a lot of exercise prescription in that same way, as people are trying to square peg around fucking hole everything because of one concept that they've learned. And the concept is muscle building. Now, yeah, there's many aspects to that, but it's like, there's so much more to this in the grand scheme of it. And I like the physiology thing's cool. Like, you go and learn that. There's so many courses you can do that's literally just gives you a base understanding of how the body works.
I think you said something interesting that should open up. Like, I think the goal of a good coach is to keep an open mind. And I think one of the things that has allowed me over time to keep an open mind is asking that question of like, hey, what do you like?
Yes.
And then, because it's like, if you have someone who, especially when you start dealing with higher end athletes who have gotten here by, some in spite of themselves, but there's gold in those conversations where like this person is exhibiting a principle that I am not yet aware of. If they say, hey, I really like this, especially the better the athlete, I go, there's something here. Like there's something to this particular training style that I am not understanding from a principles focus. I'm going to go see if I can dig in and see what that is. And it all starts with hey, what do you like? I had a conversation with this guy I'm training in the off season, and a clinician friend of mine here in Toronto was with me. We're kind of like co-managing him throughout the off season. He's like a guy, like he NFL, like from Bama, first round, like he's a guy. And I'm talking to him, I'm like, all right, man, like lay it on me. Like, what do you like? Just going through the whole rap sheet. I'm kind of leading the intake process for the off season. And he kind of looks at me and he's a bit ADD. He's running around the weight room. He goes, I gotta be honest, man, off season training up until this year, I've just been wiling out. And I'm like, right on the board, wiling out. 9-figure guy, like $100 million contract. But I'm like,
okay.
He's like, no, I want to be more structured. I'm like, no, dude. We need to put wiling out in you're a fucking ace. Like, you are the guy. So like, let's not turn our back on wiling out. Like, let's strategically, like, I'll go to the field some days. I'll do this. Like, okay, yeah, dude, he's a corner. He's a safety. He likes variability. Every play is going to be different. So no wonder he likes wiling out. When I hear wiling out, I hear like just likes to do a bunch of random shit. And it's like, all right, I'm going to look at some tools that we have in the toolbox, and we're going to make something different every day. Right? We're going to go out, we're going to have an intention behind what we make every day, but what we make is going to require us to go in and grab different tools. And all of those tools are going to be polished and sharp and or flat or whatever it is, right? Like, there's exercises that make people good at contracting or good at relaxing, or there's so many different things at play. But it's like, so another coach might be like, well, yeah, dude, you're getting old, like wiling out. We can't be doing that. I'm like, dog, that's the magic. Whatever they say they like, you don't know how it works, right? So you take the time and you figure out, or you learn how to interpret that in a way where you can logic it. But they told me, like you said, there's the answer already. It's like, okay, I need to go back into the glossary or into the textbook or into Google and figure out, why is this the answer? Not immediately discount it because I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, you don't need to push your bias onto the individual because they've given you the fucking answer. It's like, now just fine tune that answer in a way that may be a more principle based approach or have a little bit more logic behind it versus just like YOLO. It's like the YOLO is the variability. That's the principle that you then kind of like touched on from there. So let's just create variability within the training program. So you'll have structure, but the structure will look like, let's fucking send it, let's not, let's go run, let's go, with the variability aspect of that. That's a good coach. That's what needs to be looked at.
I think in the evidence-based world, people actually don't know what evidence-based means. So evidence-based is three things. Evidence-based is your personal and professional experience as a clinician or as a coach, the best practice research that we have currently available to us, and the values, technically, of your client and their preferences. You have to learn how to weight those. And it's quite difficult, one, if you have no experience. Now, experience is relative to the problem you're solving. So, for example, you need to weigh in your experience with solving the particular problem that's in front of you, while also weighing in the value of the input of that particular person and their values. So, for example, this guy, I've been around pro athletes for a decade, increasingly more so over the last 5 years. They're the only clients I have, right? And even then, at my level, whatever you want to call it, the frequency by which I'm in front of these types of problems, and I hate to call my clients problems, but like they're more advanced problems, right? Like you're dealing with a fucking Rubik's Cube who likes to while out all the time. It's like, well, how the fuck, what am I supposed to do with this? And I was like, oh yeah, if you fuck up the Rubik's Cube, this team's going to come for you for 100 million. So it's like, yeah, even there, I look at this and go, okay, relative to the number of people in the world that are like this guy, and relative to the number of people who are in my position, I still don't have a favorable enough experience for me to usurp his value in that equation. Peggy Sue, we've been doing this. Look at us. Look how old we are. Like, listen to our voices right now. If Peggy Sue comes in and goes, yeah, I really think ice cream is it. I'm like, Peggy, dog, let's have a cheat chat. We're gonna sit down. I have enough experience and I know the best practice research that look, Ben and Jerry in 31 flavors, it ain't happening. Like enough with the ice cream. Now, I've had athletes that legitimately like, yo, dog, before a game, I got to get me on that 31 flavors. I'm hitting Baskin Robbins and I'm like, Chad Ochocinco. I brought him up before on the show, but it's like, I was like, hey, Chad, like how many years? He's like, I ate McDonald's all the way through my prime. I was like, how long was your prime for? It was 8 years. I'm like, your prime in your NFL career was 8 years. He goes, yes. I was like, the average career span of most players is 3. So like, I don't have enough experience with dealing with people at that level. I don't think anyone does, where I can say to him, yo, not McDonald's. Yeah, dog, but whatever the fuck you want. Yeah. Right. So it's you need to learn how to weight variables. That's really what training comes down to, is like, how can you assign a weight to the variables? And from an evidence perspective, as a coach, the variables that you really need to weight are like your experience and their values. And they're like, how much do they know? What do they do to prove that what they could be doing could be right? Right. If some guy's got like a 12 pack and runs a 4.2, you're like, yeah, there's not many people of you in the world. So what you've stumbled across something that works, I'll go figure it out. I'm going to shut my mouth. Peggy Sue walks in, doesn't know her ear hole from her asshole, likes Ben and Jerry's. Like, all right, I'm weighting my interpretation of this problem so that I am going to start to steer the conversation in a direction that makes sense. Right. So that's what evidence-based really is. Notice how I barely talked about research at all.
Yep.
At all. I might dig into some principles or some mechanisms coming out of like, hey, this guy has more experience being the fucking guy than I have experience dealing with guys at that level. I'm going to go in and maybe I end up in the research that way. Research is a tiebreaker.
Yeah, but
right?
It is. The problem, though, that I see with people with research is they interpret it and then they take everything that is said exactly in the study and they do that. They don't look at the principle behind what the research was looking at. And that's like, I hate to do the principles matter thing because we're the big principle people. But at the end of the day, that's the fucking answer, is look for the principle, not the answer, if that makes sense. It's like the principle should dictate every decision that you then go forward with. Variability was the principle within while and out, not just while and out. It's like, let's fucking dig a little bit further to what that person is saying. Brings up, I guess, part of the intake that needs to be very fucking important. Listen to the people in front of you. Communication is about listening, not about fucking talking. It's not about you, with Peggy Sue. you're going to sit there and you're going to listen to her and you're going to listen to all the things that she's coming up with. You're not going to take over the conversation and completely stop her from talking, because that's communication. Communication is listening to the person in front of you. The intake is, as much as you've got a set of questions that you need answers for, listen to the words that come through, read the shit that comes through. Side note on intakes, actually use them. So this here's the bombshell of the fucking intake, I think, from a coach's standpoint. Do you know how many coaches I know that have an intake process that do not read their intake?
Probably a large percentage.
A large percentage. Because why? When I asked that question of what did your coach do wrong last time? Well, in my intake, I told them that I don't like eggs. And my meal plan, the first meal plan that I got, had eggs. And you sit there and you're like, listen, layup. You literally had the fucking answer once again. You clearly just aren't actually using it, because we see it. I've seen it many times in when coaches ask me, like, the question that we're kind of going through now is like, what do I need to do in an intake? Well, what's the information that you require to make the decisions? Like, that should be like the starting point, I think, when you start building out an intake. Have the legal shit and the PAR-Q and like all of those things so that you don't get sued, because that sucks. But ask questions that are going to give you answers to what you need to start. For me, that may be a much greater intake form than a coach starting. The coach starting could be like, hey, what do you like? How many times a week can you train? And like, have you had any injuries? Like, so that could be where they start. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's going to give them information for where they currently are at. But I think as you kind of build your coaching career and as you go through the experience side and you start developing the knowledge behind what questions to ask to expedite your process, to bring out your Rolodex, your index, have them start in better starting points, you need to evolve your intake process. Your intake process, like, there's some questions that I used to ask in my intake 4 years ago. I found a copy a while ago and I was like, fuck, I was stupid. What am I doing? Like, why do I ask that question? It was like, I think it was like an activity thing. Right? How many times a day do you like move or some shit? And I was like, why the fuck am I asking that? Like, that's like, I could just look, and then the next question after that is, how many steps do you do in a day? And I was like, well, it's kind of the same thing. I can kind of just get one answer and then move away from that. And it's just, I think intake needs to evolve as your coaching experience evolves. You know, I think we've spoken for 47 minutes on one thing. Fuck. But the idea is like, use the information in front of you, listen to the clientele that you are working with or people in front of you, and then start to make the decisions in this container with their input, depending on their level, with their ability to direct you or give you the answers, and then find the principles of those answers and then expedite that out.
Yeah, I think you got to realize that, and you brought up a really good point. It's like a lot of people look for a generic intake, but it's like you're going to, if you are responsive, and what I mean by responsive is if you act on the information of limited questions, you will get a better result than if you don't act on the results of a lot of questions. Because I think what coaches do is they go, oh, I found this intake, it's very in depth. And they're just like projecting this, you know, you're writing a check your ass can't cash. Like, your service is not to a point where you can really accommodate and make changes based off of these answers. And a question is only valuable if its answer changes the course of care.
Yes.
Right. And this is something we talk about towards the end of every L1 semester. It's like if I use the example of an MRI. People come to me all the time. Do you think I should get an image? And I will pose this question to them every time. Based off of how you feel, regardless of the results of the MRI, would you get surgery? And a lot of times it's no, I'm actually just kind of like curious and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, let's try a course of conservative care anyways, which we were probably going to do given how you feel. And let's not go ask the question. The MRI is going, and look, there are, you know, if you're a man over the age of 55 or a woman over the age of 45, there are contraindications to this thought process, especially around advanced imaging, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. But that idea of like the question only is valuable is if the answer changes our course of care. So if you only have a few things that are really going to move the needle for you, that's totally fine. Are there foods you don't like? Are there exercises you don't like? How many days a week would you like to train? I stopped asking people's birthdays.
Yeah.
Tell me how old you are. I'm not sending you flowers. I'll see it on Instagram. Maybe I'll have my assistant put it in my calendar for next year. If I don't think you're going to be around next year, I'm not going to do it. Like I really streamlined it. So it's like date of birth. I don't give a fuck. That's if I do month, day, year, that's 4, 6, 8 numbers. I don't need them to write those 8 numbers. When 2 would do. I'm 32. Okay, great. You're a Pisces. Don't give a fuck. You're an asshole because you were born in July. I have no idea. But like, literally take like audit, and you've talked about, you sort of walked through the chronology of your auditing process throughout the years. And I think that's such a lesson to take away. Like, audit your systems. Hey, has this, so when we write the L1 exam and we look at the L1 answers and we go, hey, everyone got this one wrong. That's not us problem.
Yep.
We should change that. Hey, I really don't pay attention to like whether my clients like vape or not. Is it having a meaningful effect on their health? Maybe. Okay, so I either need to do one of 2 things. I need to get rid of the question because I'm not acting on it, or in auditing my services, I need to start acting on it. Right. And then you'll end up with like a list of an action item list for your post intake form program building process of like, okay, how does this question affect what I am about to do with a meal plan, with a exercise program? And if you're going through the thing and you go, oh, 2 cups of coffee a day or whatever it is, then you're like, this doesn't really affect me. So I'm going to pull the question, right? And I think because that's where you're just left with communication concentrate. And communication concentrate is the things that will change the way people act, right? That's what you are communicating. That we communicate through expressing the act of listening, through the understanding of writing a program that's in line with what they are telling us, right? That is what we do. We communicate with that. We go, you are seen, you are heard. You know how I know? No eggs. That's how I know. Like, what a joke, right? Try to learn sign language. That's way harder to communicate with people. It's like, fucking good luck. I can say, I see you, you feel seen, you are understood, I value you. Bicep curl. Like amazing. That is the only, I can't speak French to save my fucking life. I only learned French long enough to get out of the fucking French class and go to the bathroom. And now I can just show that I am a great communicator because you like to foam roll and I wrote foam roll. Amazing. The rest of your life, you will struggle endlessly with other human interactions that are not your clients. When people are not paying you to talk to you, you will be miserable trying to talk to other human beings. But you should not have an issue communicating with people who are so bought into what you do that they are literally bought into what you do.
It's so simple, though.
That's why we do it.
I know. That's literally why I'm good at it, because it's simple and I don't need to know. I don't need to know the emotional aspect of like all of these. Why? No.
Myers-Briggs, sure, he was an asshole. Fuck him. Yeah. Myers-Briggs definitely put eggs on someone's diet. Who's they're
really good for you.
Yeah, they're open, extroverted. Dude, it's just nuts. It is such a low bar to be a good communicator at this job, and people just constantly find ways of just like, I'm going to put this rake in front of me and step on it, watch it bash me in the face. Morons. All right, we're gonna have to run this back for a part 2.
Fuck yeah.
So fun. This is communication from the coaching perspective, brought to you by your Sunday Monday host, James McIntosh, Jordan Shallow, RX Radio. Guys, I appreciate you hanging out. As mentioned, L1 waitlist is up for registration. If you guys hop on the waitlist, you can get the only discount we offer for the course, www.pre-script.com/PSL1, or just go to the homepage and hit the L1 button, drop your email in. Course registration opens up in a few weeks. Tickets will go fast, as they always do. Hope to see you there. Mac, any closing remarks before we wrap for the day?
Don't put fucking eggs on your client's meal plan if they don't.
There you go. This is summed up in a word. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.